Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Charleston Conference webcast, Two Ways Advanced Intelligence Make a Difference in the Library, sponsored by Ex Libris. I'm Leah Hines, Executive Director of the Charleston Conference, and I'll be moderating the session today. I have a few brief notes to go over, but while I'm doing that, please take a moment to test out the attendee chat. You should see a box at the bottom of your screen that says chat. Take a moment to introduce yourselves. Let us know your job title and your organization. You can also say hello to other participants that are in the chat if you recognize a friend or a colleague there. First up, here is just a generic Zoom webinar. When you connect, it'll ask you to connect through voice over IP, the audio, the speakers on your computer. We recommend that as the way to get audio for the best sound experience. You can also connect through your phone if you're having some difficulties with the computer speakers, but we do recommend the voice over IP. Here at the bottom, you see where you can raise your hand. It turns green when you click it, and then you can click it again to lower your hand. You can take a moment to test out the raise and lower hand function if you would like. Directly next to that is a Q&A button, so you can click that to submit your questions. We're going to hold Q&A till the end, and our presenters will address all questions that we have time for at the end. But even if we don't have a chance to get through all of the questions that are submitted there, we have the ability to email follow-up. So please do take a moment as questions pop into your mind. Just go ahead and type them there. We'll queue them up for the end and address all the questions that we have time to at the very end. At the top of the screen here, there's an option for view full screen or exit full screen. And again, at the bottom is that chat down here at the bottom left for attendee chat. Our presenters today, Christine Stone is Director of Product Management for Discovery at Ex Libris. Her focus is on strategic data projects and user-centered discovery services. Christine is a co-chair of NISO's Information Discovery and Interchange Topic Committee and is involved in various other NISO initiatives to create and promote standards and interoperability. Josh Wiseman leads several development teams in the Resources Management Division at Ex Libris. In this capacity, he's also a frequent speaker at conferences and an advocate for standards, interoperability, APIs, and integration. I'm really happy to have both of you here today, so thanks for joining us, Christine and Josh. Please note, just a moment here, that Christine and Josh will not have video as they're presenting. That's intentional. We'll have slides and audio, so don't think that there's a tech glitch or something wrong. I will turn off my video and mute my microphone while they're speaking and presenting, but I'll be available to monitor the chat, and I'll come back at the end for Q&A. And so last thing here, before I turn over to Josh and Chris, we have just a couple of poll questions for you. Multiple choice, if you can let us know, what type of attendee are you? There's a couple of different types of librarians there, some options for publisher, vendor, consultant. And then, which of the following is most true for your institution if you're a librarian? Let us know about your involvement with AI there. So I'll give you just a few moments to fill out the poll. Look like answers are coming in. We have mostly academic librarians attending today, 75% academic librarians, a few medical librarians, special public, 9% publisher vendor. And then for the AI question, most people are evaluating their options. It's looking like around 45%. And then a few people, I'm not sure what qualifies as AI, so we'll get to that today as well. Voting is slowing down, it looks like. There's a few more still coming in. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll and display the results there so you can take a look. And while you're looking at those results, I'm going to switch over to Josh and Christine's slides here, and I'll let them take over with their presentations. So thank you very much, and I will be back for Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leah, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here on this webinar this afternoon. And I'd like to speak a little bit about what we think AI really means for libraries. And that is good question, which is not necessarily, first of all, we have to define what AI is and how it might impact the library. I know some of you have answered that question inside of the poll. So let's go ahead and take a look. So first of all, in general, I think it's important that we understand that innovation is indeed happening all around us. So while change is happening in the world of technology, we have a 100% connected world, as we're aware. We have AR and VR. We have artificial intelligence. And we have an explosion of data. At the same time, we have changes happening in the library space. So we know the library is more than just a library. We know that our users are expecting more. And we know that as librarians, we're expected to do more with less. And so that brings us to some big questions. Questions such as, how relevant are we as a library? How can I provide the best service to my patrons? How can the library become more than, quote unquote, just a library? How can we do more with less to free up our own time for other initiatives outside of the things that we're doing today? And like any business, a library must reinvent itself. So any business goes through a natural curve from a startup to a growth phase to a level of maturity. And then it reaches a point where it has to decide whether or not it can reinvent itself to continue to remain relevant or moved on a decline. And libraries are like any other business in that every once in a while we reach a point where we have to make that same decision. So we here at Ex Libris try to understand what that meant, what the libraries of the future might look like. In order to get some insight, we sponsored a survey around this time last year. We had about 170 responses. The audience was Ex Libris customers, and the questions were around what type of technologies will the respondents be adopting, or already adopting, or investigating? And you can see here we asked about a number of different technologies: artificial intelligence and machine learning, voice recognition, virtual reality, 3D printing, and others. And our main insight was that more than half of the libraries either have already adopted or are planning to adopt some of these advanced technologies. Some other insights that we had as a result of this survey is first of all, a focus on patron experiences, on teaching and learning, how to expand the library's role in some of these areas which it might have had a lesser role in the past. Libraries are also focused on efficiency, doing more with less. But no matter how we look at it, new technologies will come into play in this new world. And so the question is, what does that mean for us on a daily basis? How will these new technologies affect our experiences as librarians and our patrons' experiences as they continue to use the library? So again, just a few examples of technology that we've already seen inside of the library. IoT, virtual libraries, augmented reality. But one thing is for sure, and that is that in our world around us, we are inundated today with lots of data, okay? And that is no different in the library space, okay? So in the library, we've got scholarly articles and archives databases and usage data and monographs and transactional data, news and data sets. And that data expands to, here are some numbers of publishers and scholarly articles published in the last year, books published in the last year compared to just a few years ago. And so we have this explosion of data. And the question is, how can we leverage this data to make ourselves more efficient and to get more out of our library systems to free us up to do some of those things and to enter into some of those new areas that we want to explore? And so now that brings us around to the question of AI. What is artificial intelligence? I'll give you all a second to read. This is what some people might think artificial intelligence is. just the latest buzzword. You can say artificial intelligence, you can say blockchain. If you have any technical people around you, I'm sure they throw some of these terms around. And you don't have to search far in Google to be able to come up with a whole litany of articles that talk about is AI just the next buzzword. This is a quote that I like the most, and that is that artificial intelligence is what it's called before it works. After it works, it's just a product. And that's really what we're talking about here. Artificial intelligence may be a buzzword, and it may be just fluff, but it's actually being used in a lot of different products around us, and then it becomes just part of the product. So you don't really see any products today that say such and such powered by artificial intelligence. Okay, really what we see is the use, the analysis of that big data that we spoke about in the previous slide, the analysis of that big data in order to come up with either new ways of doing things, new insights from that data, new recommendation engines. So if you think of some of the things today that we know are powered by machine learning, for example. Okay, so recommendation engines. We all see our phones and our apps are inundated with those little red bubbles that tell us how many recommendations or how many things we're supposed to do, and we feel pulled and compelled to do those things. Of course, translation engines, self-driving cars. These are all things that behind the scenes are powered by analysis of huge amounts of data and algorithms which analyze that data to come up with the recommended actions. But they're not powered by artificial intelligence. We know that those are just products now. And so when we're looking at it from the library space, the question is, we'll know that artificial intelligence or machine learning or algorithms have taken hold when it's no longer a buzzword, but rather a product or a feature in the product. And that's really where we at Ex Libris are trying to take our use of machine learning and artificial intelligence and algorithms. And so for the next part of the time we have together, let's talk a little bit about something that we're calling Dora. And Dora is an acronym for Data Analysis Recommendation Assistant. And really it's our way of providing smart recommendations in order to make smart library decisions. So we even have a little icon for Dora because every smart AI system today has to have some kind of icon. And Dora is really a data analysis engine, which analyzes the large amounts of data that we have as our systems move into the cloud, into these software as a service type systems. We benefit from large amounts of data that's shared among many institutions. So we have, whereas in previous generations, we had silos of data, and each incident of data, the interests of data to analyze both on the institutional level and anonymized and aggregated across institutions. And so we may not be talking about big data when it comes to Internet of Things, for example, where millions of messages a second. But we are talking about a situation where today, for example, in the Ex Libris Alamo world, there's over 1.5 billion bibliographic records. So that for a library system is pretty big data. So Dora, as our recommendation engine, can analyze that data, again, on an institutional level, and aggregate it and anonymize across institutions to recommend efficiencies, suggest features in order to get the most out of the system, validate configuration. And it's not enough just to make those recommendations. Our goal is to make it easy to implement those recommendations. So again, when you think about recommendation engines that you have come into contact with, of course, you can figure out by yourself. We have these personal assistants who, through quote unquote machine learning, know that when you wake up in the morning, you might put on a certain mix, and you get in the car and you drive to work and you stop off for your coffee, and it offers to order the coffee in advance. It offers to put on your favorite music mix. It puts on directions on your mapping application to help you get to work and to warn you of traffic. So those are things that these recommendation systems are learning based on patterns, based on data. And of course, you could also just as easily go into the system and bring up your maps and make your order. But the idea behind these recommendation engines is to make those actions as easy as possible. Okay, and in a work environment, in a library setting, the easier we make these recommendations to implement, the more time it frees up for our librarians and our staff to work on things that add additional value to the institutions. So if we take a minute to talk about why Dora, why are we investing in this technology now? So this really kind of circles back to the survey that we did. And based on that survey, we mentioned some wider themes that librarians are dealing with a lot of routines, but we want our librarians to be able to do more, to focus on different activities to help expand the role of librarians into other aspects of the institution and to help them be able to add additional value to their institution. Our software, in this case Alma, but software in general, is growing. Additional features are being added all the time. And it's difficult perhaps to keep up with all those features and to know that you're using the systems that you've been given to their capacity in the best way to enable you to do your work in the most efficient way. And the other aspect here that we have is this community I mentioned. The fact that not only are we no longer siloed within the institution between, for example, print and electronic and digital records, we are now no longer siloed among institutions. And so we have this community that we can start to leverage to be able to learn from our own patterns inside of our institution and to learn from patterns across the institution and different institutions within the cloud. So that's the idea behind our implementation of these machine learning algorithms. So we can get all sorts of data which we have available, again, at the user level, at the institutional level, at perhaps a consortial level, and then at the wider community level. And we can get all sorts of data, whether it's statistics, whether it's configuration, whether it's behavior, usage, and then based on that, we can provide these different recommendations in different areas of our system. So to looked at another way, we want to take a look at the data at the different levels. We want to be able to analyze the data and then make smart recommendations based on that analysis. So what type of recommendations are we able to do? So we can provide recommendations, for example, and these are just some sample use cases that we have. So for example, we know that you might be loading data, perhaps usage data from a vendor on a monthly or semi-annual or annual basis. And we know based on the behavior of other institutions that that vendor might provide a sushi interface to allow that data to be loaded automatically. Okay, so based on the fact that we see that you're loading data manually, based on the fact that we've seen that other institutions are able to use the sushi interface, we can recommend that you activate a sushi interface with that vendor. And again, that frees you up from the manual work of having to load usage data. We can take a look within the institution and say that we have some items which are being used heavily. So those items, if they're currently located in a remote storage location, we can recommend that they move to stacks. Alternatively, we can recommend items which are not being used frequently to move those into perhaps remote storage locations. Okay. And again, these are things that, of course, you know, a librarian can be charged with looking for these efficiencies, and the librarian can be charged with running the analysis and the analytics and the reports in order to be able to come up with these recommendations by his or herself. But our goal here is to make it as easy as possible to identify efficiencies which can be had and then make it easy for the librarian to implement them. So for example, we might see that a faculty member has requested a certain book that might not be available. We might make a resource sharing recommendation. Okay, we might see that a librarian is cataloging a record. We might know that another institution has a high quality record. We might suggest that you copy catalog from another institution for that record. Okay, so again, all of these types of recommendations that we can make based on analyzing the data, which is, again, at the institutional or at the community level. But it's not enough just to recommend, because as I said before, you can run the analytics and you can run the reports and you can come up with these recommendations yourself. Our goal is to make it as easy as possible to implement them in order to encourage our institutions to implement those recommendations. So we want to analyze the data that we have. We want to recommend actions which will increase efficiencies or make better use of the system. And then we want to make it as easy as possible to take action to implement the recommendation. So where we have a recommendation to, for example, turn on a particular feature or create a sushi profile or copy a record from another institution, we want to provide the user, the librarian, with a link that takes them directly to the implementation of that recommendation to make it as easy as possible. So let's go ahead and take just a few minutes and take a look at how Dora looks within the system, okay? And these are early days, okay? These are very early days for our implementation. You know, we actually have in production now a few recommendation use cases, and our plan is over the coming months to continue to analyze data, to continue to come up with additional use cases and additional recommendations that can be made, and to roll them out over the coming period of time. And so we're really right at the beginning of this smart recommendation engine, but I would like to show you how that looks inside of the system. So let's take a look here. So if we're taking a look at inside of Alma, inside of Xlibris Alma, we have a link for manage recommendations. Okay, so we can click on that link, and that link will take us to a screen that shows us a list of recommendations that we have, that Dora has identified. Okay, so for example, this recommendation, as I mentioned before, is to automatically harvest usage data for a particular vendor. Okay, again, we've noticed that the institution has uploaded manually counter files. We know based on what other institutions are doing that this vendor offers a sushi interface. And so we can recommend that this library implement a sushi account, a sushi interface with this vendor. So of course, any recommendation is based on data. And so for each recommendation, we allow the option to show me why. Show me the data that you analyzed that on the basis of which you recommended this action. So in this case, we can show you the counter files that were uploaded manually. And then once we've shown the data and you think, yeah, that looks like a good recommendation, I want to go ahead and do it, we can click on the Let's Do It option. We explain what's going to happen. We're going to take you to a part of the system where you can create a sushi account in this case. And then we'll take you directly to the screen where you can implement that sushi account. And most importantly, we will fill out as much information as we can. Again, all with the goal of making it as easy as possible to implement that recommendation so that we can analyze the data, make the recommendation, but then also remove as much friction in the process of implementing it in order to encourage our librarians to go ahead and implement those recommendations. So we do have plans for additional recommendations coming down the pike. So for example, we have one here where a request cannot be fulfilled because we don't have any resources, any items which can fulfill that request. And so we might create a recommendation to create a resource sharing request. We'll know that another institution might have that same title, and we'll offer you the opportunity to go ahead and create a resource sharing request with another institution. We can also provide recommendations, for example, to enrich a record based on community insights. So for example, I might be cataloging a record here, and I might not know which classification I want to use. So I can, for example, ask Dora to recommend a classification, and Dora can go ahead and provide insights from the community. Others have cataloged this record with different classification numbers, and I can perhaps then leverage the knowledge of the community. Also around bibliographic records, I might be able to say, as I'm starting to catalog a record, I might get a notification from Dora that there are other cataloging partners who have high quality records already cataloged for this particular title. And so I can ask Dora to show me other options in other institutions, and I can perhaps do a copy cataloging action in order to bring the record in from another institution, from a cataloging partner. Okay, so as I said, we're really in the early days here. We've just very recently released our first recommendations. We have additional recommendations coming out over the coming months. Some additional ones right around the corner in July, then followed throughout the year with additional recommendations, and this will continue into next year. And really the idea, as I said, is to find additional ways that we can leverage the data that we have to run algorithms among the different levels of data at the institutional level, at the consortial level, at the community level, to be able to make these smart recommendations and then help our users implement them. So again, this is just a slide here at the end to kind of summarize. We want to provide smart analysis, and that's kind of the machine learning or algorithms or quote unquote artificial intelligence, but really just analyzing the data that we have as a result of being a part of this software as a service world. And then I want to make intelligent recommendations in all different areas, whether it's metadata or fulfillment, resource management, and then make it as easy as possible to implement those recommendations by enabling the user to go to the particular screen that's required with as much information as filled out, and kind of smoothing the roadblocks in the way of implementing those recommendations as easily as possible. So again, as I said, early days, but we can see perhaps a glimpse of how artificial intelligence might help us in our day-to-day work. We kind of bring it down from the level of buzz and kind of buzzwords out in the community, and try to bring that down to a level of how it might affect us on a day-to-day basis, and see how we might be able to leverage the big data and algorithms that we have in order to make a difference to our everyday lives, to our impact we make in our institutions, to the efficiency of our librarians. So I thank you for your attention. I will now turn it over to Christine for the next part of our presentation.
So yeah, in my part of the session, I'm going to talk about the patron side of things, and specifically about how discovery is changing and what strategies we apply to make sure that users get to their material in our changing environment. And a big part of this is to take advantage of the opportunities of big data and big data intelligence. That's not necessarily artificial intelligence per se, using for example, machine learning, but more data intelligence, which can use AI, but does not necessarily depend on AI methods. In fact, most of what we're doing today does not rely on machine learning. That's something more that we're using in our data labs. So our environment evolves rather rapidly. There are a lot of changes which are happening right now and actually happened for the last years. First of all, we have seen a steep increase of the amount of material available, but not just that, we also have an increase in the diversity of material types. In the past, we talked about a lot about journal titles and books. Now it's also book chapters, audiovisual material, archives, research data, etc. We certainly also have a steep increase in open access material, and lately, especially OER, open educational resources, became a big topic. And at the same time, more scalable technologies became available, which provide us with more processing power. We have an increased focus on data mining and data science, and I come back to that later. And that's also important. User perception, user expectation is slowly changing, with a new generation starting to use academic libraries. That comes with increased influence of social media and consumer platforms, and a certain consumer behavior on the patron side as well. So I'm trying to change slides here. I think it's a little bit delayed. So let's see what's happening. Oops. Oh, this doesn't like me, apparently. Okay. It's also worthwhile to look at some qualitative data. We talk a lot about the mass of data, but there is also, of course, qualitative data available that is collected in various surveys. And I'm looking here at a ProQuest survey that ProQuest ran in spring 2018. They had about 1,300 responses across all disciplines. And apart from faculty, this also included responses from almost 200 students. And I only picked out 2 different answer parts of that survey, which I think is very relevant for us in discovery as well. Okay. The first one is about the wide mix of content types. Over 90% of respondents agreed that this contributes to understanding concepts and ideas more fully. It helps conduct a more thorough literature review, and also it provides better quality assignments, apparently. The second interesting point is about the use of primary sources. Again, I only picked out the answers respondents gave over 90% importance, which is that primary sources help to develop critical thinking skills. They also provide greater understanding of the topic being studied, and they allow students to work with original sources. Of course, the latter is rather obvious, but I think also worth mentioning. I come back to this later because it's also something that we need to consider for discovery. And just to add to this, I want to draw your attention to one of the results from the ESA faculty survey from 2018, which says that there is substantial interest in use of open educational resources for instructional practices, particularly from younger faculty members. Again, this is something we need to take into account in discovery as well. So what does this actually all mean? First of all, varied content types are in demand by faculty, students, and also by researchers. And this trend continues to grow as more content types become available. That is, for example, growth of video or audiovisual data, data in general, conference and working papers, etc. This also catches the eye of the instructors who want their students to be inspired as well as to learn and think critically, of course. And we need to remember here that also the instructors today often come increasingly from a younger generation, and that may also cause a shift in behavior and a different consumer behavior, really. And finally, open educational resources is becoming a desired part of teaching and learning. So again, that is also something that will influence discovery to a certain extent. Let's talk about discovery, all those changes in our environment, including the increased mass of material and also the increased diversity and the changing interest of faculty and students to use a variety of material has a profound impact on library discovery. I'd like to see library discovery as something that is opening doors to knowledge, doors to resources, and it certainly provides access to a very, very rich body of data already today. And that's going too fast forward. I have a bit of problem with the delayed slides here. Okay, maybe it's better not to touch it and just talk to this is actually my next slide. So I just finished very quickly the previous one. The point is really we're indexing a lot of different information, a lot of different data, publish and aggregator content, digital repositories, etc., open access content, etc. But we need to keep in mind that the more data we index and the more diverse it becomes, the more difficult it also becomes for this to be discovered purely with a single search box approach. The single search box is still important, it remains important, but it cannot be the only means anymore to discover. In today's environment, we need more sophisticated tools to provide users with the ability to not just run a search via the search box, but to use different entry points to explore and to find more material. A key trend in discovery is data intelligence and contextual services, generally data-related innovations, for obvious reasons. Our discovery indexes are big data repositories. We currently index between 3 and 4 billion records, and several hundred millions are being added every year. So this is really, really big data. That also means that we can leverage them to create meaningful services, and that's beyond the single search box approach. None of this material that we index stands by itself. They may show authors, they may come from the same collection, they may be about each other, they may cite each other or share similar lists of citations, or maybe an instructor added 2 items to the same course reading list. That also creates a connection. And such relations are a key basis for creating context and also for creating contextual services around material. Data science here is giving us the tools to generate meaningful insights on how items relate to each other. And new technologies provide the processing power to run the algorithms across such a large index. And finally, services that are based on data intelligence, or in other words, smart services, can provide useful tools and context to the users. The users still need to find their material within these huge data repositories. So we need to really help them and provide some tools for them to do this in a more efficient way than just to run the search. So I hope I can get to the next slide because I seem to be stuck again. Okay. We have formal and informal relationship, and let's look at one example here. In this case, I found an article about chocolate and health, my favorite search, and just this one article can have multiple relations and relationship types. And this slide here is only illustrates some really. There are for sure others. Items can be related because they cite each other. They might be from the same journal issue, or in the case of books, actually a book chapter might be from the same book as another. They might share the author. The article might use a research data set, and the same set is used by another article. They might often be used together, so a user who clicks on one is also likely to look at the other. Or they may be about the same topic. And while the authors, the citations, the journal issue, and the research data are formal relations, the relations via topics and via usage are informal. They're generated either by a machine or by a person, but they are not necessarily static. And those relations can be transitive and create a relationship network. They're not just direct relations, they are also indirect relations. So what does it mean for the library patron who's looking for material for the coursework or for a research project? The user usually starts with a general search. Based on the search results, they may refine the search, use filters, run a new search, etc. But with the data relations, we now provide an additional entry point for discovery, which is not just about searching. They help the users to understand the context of an item, as well as helping them to find additional material without really having to run new searches. And this leads to an enhanced user and learning experience. It has a positive impact on learning and research output. The user learns more about the topic by being pointed at related topics, items with possibly different keywords. It also leads to enhanced information literacy. And that is coming back to some of the survey results I talked about earlier, it can also support the use of more diverse material. It leads generally to the results that the user may not have found with just a search. And it also can give users more ideas for new searches. Before we look at some of those relationship services, we need to come back to the discovery index. At Ex Libris, we started with creating such relationship-based services a long time ago, actually about 10 years ago, and I talk later in this presentation about specific services and what they do. But with the increased need for such services, we also started looking at a more future-proof solution and the way we index the data. And as a result, decided last year to create a new discovery index as a core part of that solution. So I'm going to briefly talk about this before I come to the services. If the slide is moving. Okay, I seem to have some problems again. Oh, okay. So there are two main aspects of the new discovery index, or short CDI, Central Discovery Index is how we call it. One is operational efficiency, which is always important, but especially in view of the expected growth in the next years. CDI will provide us with better technologies and tools, for example, for faster ingest, updates, etc. But the second part is that CDI is not just a discovery index. It also contains a graph database that we specifically created to create and store relationships between material that we index in the index. So the focus here is on data intelligence and on creation of new services based on contextual relations. That is to provide exploration tools with formal and informal relationships and to provide context and also glanceability. And I talked about this a little bit later. In the following slides, I'm going to take a look at some of the relationships we are creating and some of the services that are already available, just to give you an idea of what is possible and what it actually gives the user. So let's see if I can move that slide, yeah. This is a relatively simple example. We index books and book chapters. So I have two relations. I have the books, and if I find the book, it also leads me to the book chapters. And I have chapters and other chapters of the same book. You can see here that I have a link to the full record, a link in the full record, and this is an example from Primo. I click on it, and I get the chapters for this book. Another relatively simple formal relation is books and book review. It works in the same way. So instead of having those popping up somewhere in the result list, we have a relation. So I get the book reviews, and then I can check out, I have from the book what reviews were written about that book. And don't forget that some of the data will come from the local indexes, your local catalog data on your or your local special collections, and some of the data come from the central index. We can still create the relation via the graph database regardless where the data is coming from. So sometimes the book may come from the local index, from your local catalog, and the book review may come from the central index. So there's kind of cross relations between the different indexes. The citation trail is a bit more complex. This is a feature we introduced in Primo about 2 years ago, and more recently into Summon. That's an example here from Primo. We on purpose created this feature as a trail rather than a flat relation. You can see on the full and brief result list a link for items that cite the item I'm coming from, and equally a link to material it cites itself. If I click on it, I get a list of citing or cited material. Again, I see the links on the brief items, and I can click on the next list and I can follow a trail. So on top of the string, you can see the trail, and I can go backwards and forwards without having to leave it. This feature basically recreates a very common way users and specifically researchers collect material, and have done so actually a very long time, starting when everything was still print and not electronic. They look at the list of citations of one article of interest, go to one, check the next list of citations, and note any items that they're interested in. So this provides context, but it's also a very effective way to discover more material. Another way to create relations is usage data. This is something that originates from consumer platform. You probably all know Amazon. When you look at a book, for example, you get a list of books other users have purchased or looked at together with your item of interest. Users today are consumers. They come from a world where they expect the system to make suggestions and provide ideas. And that is exactly what BX here does. BX was first created 10 years ago. It's actually not new. But that means also that we have a huge body of usage data that was collected over time. The way it works is that if a user looks at 2 items in the same session, that is, they clicked on the full text link, the usage is connected by a session ID. And I should add here that it's completely anonymous. This is not collecting any personal data. We don't know which user made that choice. We only know that these 2 articles or 2 books or book chapters have been used together. Based on that usage, we create a relationship network of items that are used together, but we also calculate transitive relations, and the relations are weighted. For example, a direct relation counts more than a transitive relation, and based on that, we provide suggestions to the user. So I hope that is changing to the next slide eventually. Yeah. Okay. And this is what it looks like. Just to give an example, again, I have an article about the relation between chocolate and health. I get a link, related articles. This is an example from Summon here that suggests a link of other material to look at. The items on that list have a topical relation, but they do not necessarily use the same keywords. And you can see this in the list here. So I would probably not have found them in the result list of my search, but I get them as suggestions. I'm learning 2 things here. First, the items provide more context for the first item I looked at. And secondly, they provide me with more keywords. It tells me about the topic, but I can also use them to run a new search here. So we looked at relatively simple relations like book to book reviews, slightly more complex one, citation trail, and usage-based relations that can be used to provide the user with suggestions. But we also have curated relations. So for example, items that come for the same course reading list because an instructor decided that these items are valuable material for a specific course. Or they may come from the same collection because a librarian decided that this is where they best fit. In both cases, we can use that relation to provide suggestions. So in this example, from a feature that we are, from a feature that we're just designing for Primo, I come from an item that was listed in an instructor's reading list, and I can show a link directly to the reading list where it came from. But I can also show other items, of course, from the same reading list, and the same for collections. So this is really a curated relation that was either coming from an instructor, or it can come from a librarian if it's about the collection. And again, this provides context, but also suggestions for other material the user might be interested in. It's a feature on Primo that we're just designing at the moment, but I can imagine that there are also other curated relations in future that we can use for relations. I talked earlier about glanceability in relation to the new Central Discovery Index. Glanceability is about seeing at one glance if and how an item in the result list can be useful for the user, for the user-specific context. In the mess of data and the sometimes super long result list, the concept of enhanced glanceability is becoming increasingly important, I think. We started in Summon to flag articles that are original research. You should see this in this little box there, as opposed to review articles. And we also added the number of pages they have. This is good information for the user to see if this article is of interest for them. Some users may want to have original research. Other users are more interested in review articles. That gives them at first glance that sort of information. We also flag open access material. Now, this is not really that interesting for the majority of users. Most users just want to know if they have access or not, and not why they have access. But we also have users who find that interesting. The citation trail, which is the cites and cited by, and the related articles also provide context and therefore give the user a better idea how it fits to the research question. And then we also have enrichments from Altmetrics in this case, or in other cases for books, for example, from Synthetics Unbound, that can help with glanceability. And in future, we're looking at flagging more items as original research or review articles. We only just started this, so that will increase over time. And we're also going to add this to Primo at one point. We will start flagging primary research at one point. That's also coming back to the survey I talked about at the beginning. We will flag items included in course resource lists. Again, that's something I mentioned. For now, we are planning this for Leganto, but we can probably extend this at one point to other reading list systems. And we are looking into flagging into educational resources, and especially open educational resources. Again, something that came up in the surveys, and that's particularly important for instructors to identify the material that they want to add to the course reading list. And open educational resources are certainly becoming more important. Adding those flags to results in the result list does enrich the discovery experience, in my opinion, and it does make a real difference to users. In the measurement material that we're indexing today, the result lists are not getting shorter if you run a search, and this is not something you can just solve with ranking or ranking changes, because often it's not really known what the context of the user is, and we need to just work with the search they're entering into the search box. But if you offer other contextual services, that can actually give the user some entry points to then look for additional material and find better context. And just very briefly, always when I talk about mass of material, I always feel that I need to talk about unique material. Obviously, if you talk about data intelligence and all of that, you talk about big data. But not everything is about the mass of data. And I always feel that we need to look at discovery as something that is also opening doors to special collections. So I would like to mention this here. The focus cannot just be on the mass. The focus should also be on the unique. There are a variety of things that we are offering, a variety of features that we are offering that give you an option to promote your own collections. And I think this is very important in a discovery system to have that, not just to dump it into the result list and hope that the users are finding it, but actually emphasize the uniqueness of your collections as well. There's a collection discovery feature in Primo, which allows you not just to find it in the result list, but also as part of a collection. There are the resource and database recommenders, which are both in Summon and in Primo. There are featured results, and there are also relations and suggestion services, which I think we are going to use more in future to also point people at unique material and not just create relations just on big data. And I should also mention here again, it's in addition to the one search box. It's not, the single search box is not disappearing or anything. It's in addition to that. But I think these methods are really needed to point out the uniqueness of your collection as much as the mass of material that we want users to find, or whether we want them to find their what they need. So this was my last example. I hope I'm not getting through this too quickly now to make up for the time. Just to talk briefly about the benefits for the user. There are a number of benefits those services provide. That's first of all, easy and fast finding material. With only one search, I run one search, it finds material, but then I also find entry points to do discovery via the relations, and I find other material. The relationship-based services are something users already know from consumer platforms and probably also social media. So for them, they're actually pretty intuitive features, and they also provide discovery by serendipity. They provide a learning experience, for example, about the topic by finding keywords users did not previously think about. That's something that I also find very useful when I'm doing searches. I find one item, I usually think of my first search, but all the different items that I find via the relations give me just more ideas, and I learn about the topic, and I can run my searches with that. They create context around material and increase glanceability, also very important. And because the mass of data, we also need special services to easily discover the unique collection. So when talking about the mass, never forget the unique. The unique is equally important. And in our changing environment, this is becoming more and more important, I think. Okay. So this is the summary. Big data is certainly transforming our world with challenges, but it's also providing us with opportunities. And libraries are offering more kinds of content which needs to be discoverable, including unique materials. We need those opportunities and those transformations to make this discoverable. It means that data intelligence becomes a core part of our discovery systems. Essentially, we move from simple search systems to a kind of intelligent discovery experience. And that is really needed in today's world of big data and big indexes especially. I think that technology here doesn't like me. It's going backwards. And finally, library discovery can open doors to content, collections, to learning and to exploration, and to the mass of data, but also to the unique data. And there can be many doors to discovery as well. I think in future, we need to look at how we bring discovery to where the user is, not necessarily try to teach the user to come to the library or the library web page for that. Okay, and now I'm trying to go to the slide that is summarizing the entire session. Okay, so this is the last part of it's kind of the summary of the entire session. In our session, you heard about intelligence derived from data that can be used to enrich the library in general. And Josh talked about the back end and how automated services can save you time. And he also showed you Dora, Alma's smart decision support engine. And in my part, I talked about the patron side of things and how we can use database services and relationship to enrich the discovery experience. So advanced intelligence can help us in many ways, whether it's artificial or not, whether it's in library management, research and discovery, and systems for students and learning. We can use it in relation to applications, workflows, and also of data. And I think you will see a lot more of this making its way into the library world and certainly into the ex-libris systems in the future. Okay, that was my last slide, and I'm really sorry that we're running over time. Thanks for everyone who stayed until the very end. I'm not sure if we have now time for questions, Leah, because we are really running out of time, right?
I think we can address a few questions here. The attendees that need to leave, if they have an appointment, are welcome to disconnect, and we'll have a recording that'll be available so that they can hear the Q&A that we go through. And any questions that we don't address live here today, we can follow up by email. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to Christine and Josh. And thank you for our attendees for being here. And let's get through a few of the questions that were asked in the chat here. So one is, how accurate is the disambiguation of names and items? Christine and Josh, would you like to address that?
Yeah, I can take that, probably, or part of that. Names are a problem at the moment. We are actually not identifying names. And if you talk about authors, that is, and I assume you do. So currently we're not doing that. We're looking at using authority files and also ORCID. For example, we are increasingly indexing ORCIDs in our discovery index. We have already a few 100,000, I think, in the index. It's not critical mass yet. So we need to wait a little bit until we have more before we can actually use that. So that's a good point. Names are particularly problematic. Okay. What was the second one? Names and?
Items.
Items. I'm not entirely sure what you refer to with items. I mean, items if we look at the discovery index, items are metadata items. They're a book or an article or, you know, a research data set, etc. They're usually identified by IDs, or if that doesn't help, then we use keys, and that's metadata keys.
Okay, thank you.
I hope it answered it, because I'm not entirely sure about that question.
The next question, does AI determine whether the article is original research or a review article? Currently, there are many review articles that our discovery service isn't necessarily identifying as such.
Right. So there are different ways to do this. In our case, we're not using artificial intelligence for that. We actually found that a lot of the articles have that in the subject headings, and that proved to be critical mass for now. So for the next stage, we're going to look also at the text and use more text mining methods. But for now, for the first part, that was actually enough. So we're using the subject headings and actually some other phrases that we find in the metadata. So we don't need artificial intelligence for that. I think, you know, artificial intelligence is such a buzzword. You want to use it for everything, but we're using it for those things where it makes sense. For other things, you can just, you know, use phrases or use patterns to identify things, and that's what we are using currently.
Great. There was a second, it looks like a second part to that question, maybe a comment. It says whether a source is considered a primary source or not often depends on the context of one's research question. So that was a little addendum there.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and I completely agree with that. I'm a historian, so for me this is also very important. We have no clear process right now how to define primary sources. There are some things which are quite clearly primary sources, but you're right, for other things it depends on the context, and we have not yet figured out how exactly we're going to flag this. There were some demands to flag this based on the collection, so some collections are flagged as primary, and therefore the material in these collections are primary material, but I'm not 100% sure about this. So we have not made a decision on that yet.
Gotcha, thank you. Another question, do you also generate, as Scopus does, a list of related articles, in quotations, based on citations?
We are not using the citations for anything else than the citation trail right now. So we are not using this in the background or anything to calculate relations. We were thinking that in future, once we created more relation types, we may want to use this. Also, we want to maybe look at relationship graphs per citations, but it's not planned for the near future. Maybe sometimes. You know, in my view, I'm a practical person. I want to do practical services. The citation trail is very practical. I don't want to have, you know, some theoretical things that I'm creating in the background and that may or may not help. So maybe in future, but we haven't considered that yet.
Great, thank you. Another question, will you create profiles that provide weighted results based upon user characteristics, such as a graduate student in engineering with technical reports and DoD materials heavily weighted in the results?
Right, no, the answer is no. That's going into personalization. We have considered that. Problem number one is that we don't actually know who the user is. We don't have that information currently. So unless the user gives it to us, we don't know who the user is. There is an issue with privacy here, which I think we need to be very sensitive about. And there's also an issue with bias here. So yes, personalization is important and we need to consider this. It's also somewhat on our agenda for research, but we have not gone very far with that. We did introduce a personalization feature in Primo some years ago, which means that the user can select their discipline, and based on the discipline, we are going to change the ranking in the result list. It was very subtle, and it was more about trying it out. The problem is that a lot of users don't tick boxes, and they don't tell us what their discipline or whatever is. So again, we are back to the fact that currently we don't know who the user is. There is a privacy issue with that, but I agree with you that this is something that we might want to look at in future, especially if the user is coming from the beginning from a personal machine where we can actually, you know, store things there and we don't have to know who the user is. But I you know, it's really something for the future, and we have to be careful with that also in relation to bias.
Great, thank you. And our last question, can others access your graph to build their own analyses and applications or combine with other data sets and graphs?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Again, we may come back to this later on, but not at this point. At this point, it's really for our systems to use that to create relations.
Great. Well, thank you very much. to Christine and Josh, and thank you again for all of our attendees. The recording will be made available on the Charleston Conference website within just a couple of days. We'll also have the slides available with contact information for any questions or follow-up. So thanks everyone, and have a wonderful day, and we'll see you back next time for our next Charleston Conference webinar. Thanks
Thanks, everyone.
everyone.